It appears the PDP campaign slogan for the 2015 election is "to hell with the poor." In the midst of these provocations, a supposedly successful transformation agenda is being peddled as the basis of re-election for 4 more years. We have failed to admit that our economic growth is not so much the result of astute fiscal and monetary policy as it is of the global steering of the 4 winds of the earth. In our monoproduct economic structure, international political and military crisis, especially among oil-producing states, has been the cause of our claimed economic growth due to the resultant high oil prices brought about by a shortfall in the supply of the product. Now that the prices are falling, with some of our XY major importers abandoning our crude, and with the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, OPEC, vowing not to cut production output, even if the price falls to $20 per barrel, we are face to face with an economic crisis that an austerity budget based on uncertain income projections cannot address. These red flags of economic upheaval are being raised alongside an alarming security situation that has so far cast serious doubt on our military capability. Who would have thought that Nigerians will one day be displaced from their homes and will become refugees in countries like Chad and Niger? Who would have thought that entire communities in one geopolitical zone of the country will one day be under the control of terror groups, or that the time will come when hundreds of women and children will be carted away by terror groups on more than one occasion with no intervention by security forces? Who would have expected that Nigerian soldiers will one day be helpless against insurgents to the extent of abandoning inferior weapons and fleeing to neighboring Cameroon? Who would have thought that Nigeria will one day be classified alongside Iraq and Afghanistan on the list of terror-stricken nations? In the recent Global Terrorism Index, based on 2013 incidents, Nigeria ranked 4th among 162 countries with 303 reported attacks, 1,826 fatalities, and 457 injuries. Terrorism was said to have cost Nigeria $28.48 billion in the year 2013. Nigeria is surpassed only by Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Iraq in this index. Given the dastardly activities of Boko Haram last year, the 2014 index will be even more damning for Nigeria. Welcome to Fair Havens, a transitional harbor. Acts 27, verses 7 and 8. Acts 27, verses 7 and 8. When we had sailed slowly many days and arrived with difficulty off Cnidus, the wind not permitting us to proceed, we sailed under the shelter of Crete of Salmon. Passing it with difficulty, we came to a place called Fair Havens near the city of Lasea. With great difficulty, the Alexandrian ship in which Paul traveled arrived at a place called Fair Havens, and in verse 8, we notice that there was contemplation to temporarily harbor the ship in that location, but the harbor was not suitable to winter in. In like manner, the journey of the ship of the Nigerian state has thus been difficult, and we have largely been drifting under the influence of the winds. It is clear that a great storm lies ahead as we are approaching elections without addressing the fundamental flaws in the polity. These flaws include, number one, the awkward geopolitical structure that has the form but lacks the substance of federalism. Two, the consequent lopsided economic structure in which a single product from one region of the country contributes the bulk of the revenue of the entire nation despite the abundant resources spread across the nation. Number 3, a constitution that lays claim to the phrase, "we the people," but to which the people made no impute. Number 4, contentious population figures that have been the harbinger of election disputes since the pre-independence era. And number 5, an electoral body that wears the label independent but is practically under the control of the presidency. These factors have directly and indirectly contributed to the current economic crisis, political instability, and the security situation. We managed to trudge on in this condition, advancing with great difficulty until we got to our own fair heavens. We arrived at our fair heavens when, for the first time in the history of our nation, a person from the South, the region was hit by the fundamental flaws in our polity, became president. One would have expected that, being from the Niger Delta and an academic for that matter, President Jonathan will understand the role carved out for him, lay aside transient political ambitions, and champion the cause of restructuring while pursuing national integration, and then go down in history as Nigeria's greatest leader hitherto. But this is yet to be seen. However, President Goodluck Jonathan came close to living up to this when he convoked the 2014 National Conference, a gathering of nobles, elders, and the young from across the nation, in which these issues were critically examined and recommendations made. Fellow Nigerians, I speak expressly to you that the report of the 2014 National Conference is a fair heavens in which Nigeria must winter to avoid the storms that are ahead. Just the way Paul on the Alexandrian ship perceived that the voyage will end in much loss and warned the centurion, helmsman, and ship owner, I warned the nation through a broadcast and press conference held at the Lateran Assembly on Sunday, July 22nd, 2012. I told the nation that I perceive that there will be no 2015 if we fail to fix 2014. Indeed, those perceptions were signals I was speaking at the time, but there are practical pointers in that direction today, even if faintly perceptible to the discerning. Between 2012 and now, the signs have become more visible. Those stakeholders still refuse to pay attention. Like Paul, our counsel has become unpopular. And as it was in the Alexandrian ship, the majority has asked that the ship of state set sail towards the general elections rather than winter in fundamental reforms such as those proposed in the 2014 National Conference. And the reason is obvious. Just like Fair Havens was an inconvenient place for the Alexandrian ship to winter in, change or reformation is a difficult process and is often not suitable to the comfort zone mentality that prefers to do the same thing over and over again and hope for a different result, a mentality which, according to Albert Einstein, is the very definition of insanity. Now, weather forecast. Ominous shadows and gathering storm. In Acts of the Apostles, chapter 27, verses 9 and 10. Acts 27, 9 and 10. When much time had been spent and sailing was now dangerous because the fast was already over, Paul advised them, saying, "Men, I perceive that this voyage," you can put there, this election, 2015, "I perceive this voyage will end with disaster and much loss not only for the cargo and ship, but also our lives. Paul warned there that the voyage will end in disaster, but the centurion, the commander of the army that was charged to take Paul to Rome, was persuaded more by the opinion of the experts, in quote, the helmsman and owner of the ship, than by what Paul was saying. One will want to ask, were there no visible signs of the impending storm? Was it just Paul's spiritual perception that was at work? We will find that the journey all the way to fair heavens from the coast of Asia, beginning from the ship of Adramyttium, was laden with difficulty because of contrary winds that caused difficulty in navigation and obstructed procession. Likewise in our nation, despite the warnings, Mr. President is more persuaded by the assurance given him by the experts and by what others will say if he does not proceed, including the managers of the economy, the organizers of the elections, the heads of the armed forces and security agencies, as well as the expectations of the majority, than by a lone voice charging him to come for a while in order to fix the fundamentals. However, the same question applies in the case of our nation. Is it just my perception and those of others in the minority today that have prompted this warning of an impending storm? Are the signs not visible? What is the weather forecast saying? Weather forecasting entails the gathering of quantitative data and the application of an understanding of atmospheric behavior to predict the changes in weather. Jesus, our Lord, made reference to this practice in Matthew chapter 16, verse 1 to 3. Matthew 16, 1 to 3. Then the Pharisees and Sadducees came and testing him asked that he will show them a sign from heaven. He answered and said to them, when it is evening, you say, it will be fair weather, for the sky is red. And in the morning, it will be foul weather. Today, for the sky is red and threatening. Hypocrites, you know how to discern the face of the sky, but you cannot discern the signs of the times. When I first alerted the nation that there will be no 2015 if the fundamentals were not addressed in the year 2012, I was asked if I was given a prophecy in the order of thus saith the Lord. Even now, many are asking the same question. At that time, like Paul, I told you that I'd perceived it, but I would want to ask, are the signs not there? If we can predict the weather, would it not be hypocritical to feign ignorance regarding the foreboding state of the nation? Can we not see the wind, the clouds gathering ahead of a major storm? Hear my warning today. There is too much turbulence ahead. A competent helmsman knows not to sail in such a situation. Instead of ignoring the weather forecast, only to subsequently shipwreck, kill himself, the crew, the passengers, as well as destroy the ship and the cargo. I will briefly highlight certain crucial developments that we may be disregarding as we sail into the general elections, but I must first point out that the purpose for highlighting these red flags is to challenge decision makers and political stakeholders, as well as security, military, and intelligence agencies, to take the steps necessary to avert crises before elections, during elections, and after elections, whenever they hold. I must also warn that if we sail into general elections at this time without fixing the fundamentals, no matter what precaution is taken by the helmsman and the owner of the ship, once the ship sets sail from fair havens, an encounter with Euroclydon will be inevitable. Against this backdrop, I present the signs of the gathering storms. Sign number 1, poor level of election preparedness. That's sign number 1. Reasonable people are inclined to ask how prepared the Independent National Electoral Commission, INEC, is for the upcoming general elections. Despite the desperate efforts of the Commission to manage pre-election logistics, the tales of woe that have trailed the permanent voters' card collection exercise have raised a lot of questions as to the level of preparedness of the Commission, with many Nigerians feeling disenfranchisement. The Vanguard of November 15, 2014, in an article titled Permanent Voters Cards, PVC, How INEC Failed Nigerians, it was reported that more than 75% of the PVCs in rural areas in Lagos were left uncollected. Similar and even worse tales of woe trailed the exercise in other states, such as in Edo State, where the PVCs were stolen. The Nigerian pilot of November 17, 2014, reported a collection rate of less than 50% in Abia State. A survey conducted by News Agency of Nigeria on public perception regarding INEC's preparedness for the elections, including the organization's handling of voter registration and card collection exercises, and the adoption of recommendations to forestall the challenges of the 2011 elections, gave INEC a low scorecard. Similarly, acts of lawlessness on the part of political parties and seeming partisanship on the part of security agencies have raised questions as to the readiness of the stakeholders to conduct or to allow the conduct of a free, fair, and credible elections. How else can one explain the fact that in violation of Section 99 subsection 1 of the Electoral Act 2010 as amended, political campaigns commenced long before the opening of the window? How else can one explain the invasion of the Secretariat of the APC by the Department of State Security? Either a political party was devising unlawful schemes, in which case culprits ought to be prosecuted and details exposed, or the DSS was acting out a script written to repress opposition parties. Whichever may have been the case, it questioned the readiness of stakeholders to operate by the rules. Sign number 2, safety and security risks. A study on Boko Haram attacks in Nigeria in the period between 2006 and 2013 by Chatham House in the United Kingdom revealed that 17 states in the north were terror-prone and recorded varying degrees of violent attacks leading to violent deaths. In terms of frequency of attacks, Borno, Yobe, Kano, Kaduna, Adamawa, and Bauchi, in that order, led the other states. Further compilation of recorded incidents from other sources showed that towards mid-2014, Boko Haram attacks had become an almost daily occurrence in Borno State. Terror attacks or threats of same was also reported in northern states that had been previously free of such, including Kogi, Nasarawa, as well as in southern states such as Lagos, Delta, and Imo. Given the new tactics being adopted by the Boko Haram sect, especially suicide bombing by teenage girls, who it appears the sect is increasingly targeting for abduction, the risk factor in massive political rallies and in polling units across the north of the country, and to a lesser extent in the south, is dangerously high. Let us not forget that in December 2014, a female suicide bomber arrested by vigilante forces in Borno State revealed that 50 other female suicide bombers had been let loose. As INEC had requested of the federal government a massive deployment of armed forces and security agents for the general elections, a proposal that is being opposed by opposing parties, I challenge the federal government to conduct an honest assessment of the capability and numerical strength of each of the security agencies and armed forces, and assure Nigerians that the ratio of forces to polling units across the Federation is such that can effectively ward off potential attacks and guarantee security.